Earlier start time, 9:42.
I'm gonna tell you how it's gonna be. You're gonna give your look to me.
Right now, though, the time is 7:30, and Hubert Gregg says, I call it style. Tonight he turns a personal spotlight on Carroll Gibbons.
The sound that was typical of the Savoy Hotel restaurant in the 30s and 40s, the sprightly side of the piano style of Carroll Gibbons. It was unmistakable to millions who heard him on the air, bought and played his records, or had the special privilege of dining and dancing at the Savoy in the golden years. Even in wartime, when there was other metal about outside, there was pure gold within. Carroll would move freely from one facet of style to another, equally unmistakable, like this. Those single notes played down in the bass, so typical again. Sometimes they carried the melody, at others they complemented another instrument. Of course, these tempo changes didn't happen during dancing at the Savoy. There, all was as smooth as silk. Carroll reserved them for his recordings. A bit of light and shade, he probably said to himself, but it could be maddening. Suppose you liked dancing, and not only liked dancing, liked the coziness it could lead to, and couldn't afford the Savoy. I mean, it wasn't everyone in the 30s who could run to £2 or £3 for dinner. You had to fall back on the corner house and going home to listen to records. I've got the latest Carroll Gibbons, you'd whisper. Better than etchings. During the slow bits, you might get to first or even second bass very nicely while cheek-to-cheeking, only to have the ground swept from under you when Mr. Gibbons changed tempo again. Every bit as familiar to us was Carroll's style in speaking, the American accent, his drawling, unhurried introductions uttered on the radio, the slight hesitance, the hint of a stammer that had the ladies at his feet, or clustered about his piano. It was a deepish voice. To the ladies he would explain, I gargle with gravel.
Oh, hello, everybody. This is Carroll Gibbons speaking to you from the Savoy Restaurant, the Savoy Hotel, London. Strangely enough, our first tune is called Stompin' at the Savoy.
At the time I heard and saved up for and bought my first Carroll Gibbons record for £2 bob, I thought the song Stompin' at the Savoy meant living it up at the hotel in the Strand, West Central London. Later, still an extreme younger, I actually dined there and wondered how anyone could speak of stomping to that supremely sophisticated music. All was made clear to me in the late 30s when I played on Broadway and trekked nightly to and trucked at the Savoy in Harlem. So there were two Savoys. The one in London did go back in name anyway to Gilbert and Sullivan, so stomping or no stomping, you could say it had the edge. To the playing and speaking style of Carroll Gibbons was added another facet. He was persuaded to sing. The odd vocal chorus to the accompaniment of his orchestra became a full vocal performance to his own solo accompaniment. Carroll would have been the last to lay claim to a singing voice, but the ladies sighed, as Shakespeare had Jacobson put it, like furnace, and rushed to buy the records. We all bought them. One song was about a girl a man took one look at and vanished. In the piano chorus, listen for another Carroll trademark, the slurred triplets.
Water, water, everywhere, but my daughter won't touch a drop. Where's the waiter who left her waiting there in a broken-down luncheon shop? I want the waiter with the water. I want the waiter with the water for my daughter. I want the waiter with the water for my daughter, 'cause my daughter has an order for some water on a tray. He's got a menu that'll send you He's got a menu that'll send you and befriend you. He's got a menu that'll send you and befriend you, maybe lend you if you help me find the waiter with the tray. While my daughter was having lunch one day, she caught the waiter's eye. He took one look at her and ran away. Now she's gonna die of thirst unless I find that guy. Want the waiter with the water. Want the waiter with the water for my daughter. Don't want the butcher or the baker or the candlestick maker. Want the waiter with the water on the tray. I want the waiter with the water for my daughter. I want the waiter with the water for my daughter, 'cause my daughter has an order for some water on a tray. He's got a menu that'll send you. He's got a menu that'll send you and befriend you. He's got a menu that'll send you and befriend you, maybe lend you if you help me find the waiter with the tray. While my daughter was having lunch one day, she caught the waiter's eye. He took one look at her and ran away. Now she's gonna die of thirst unless I find that guy. Want the waiter with the water. Want the waiter with the water for my daughter. Don't want the butcher or the baker or the candlestick maker. I want the waiter with the water on the tray.
It wasn't until I went into songwriting in the 40s that I met Joe Brandley, a friendly American who was connected with the publishing firm of Peter Maurice Music. In the 20s, Joe played the banjo and was apparently something of a fixer, a finder of musicians. The Savoy Hotel group, which included the Berkeley Hotel in Piccadilly, needed a sax player, and Joe mentioned a fellow American named Rudy Vallee. Vallee was a college lad who'd caused quite a stir among young females in America. He had copper-coloured curly hair, not easy to say, and a voice that attracted even when singing through a megaphone. After spending a year at the University of Maine and singing "Fill the Stein for dear old Maine, shout till the rafters ring," he left and went to Yale. Only in America would it be likely that a college man might interrupt his studies to travel the vaudeville circuit with a band. Rudy Vallee did. The band was the Yale Collegians. It isn't surprising that he didn't graduate until he was 26. At 23, he was on the SS Olympic, bound for Southampton and London, and a place in the Havana band at the Savoy Hotel. The professors at Yale once more were left panting to instill knowledge while Rudy would blow into a sax and sing into a megaphone. Joe Brandley met the boat train when it reached Victoria and noticed that Rudy had a young lad with him. "Name's Carroll Gibbons," said Rudy. "Plays piano." "We don't need a pianist," said Joe. "He doesn't need you," said Rudy. "He's from the Boston Conservatory, over here to study real music. Wait till you hear him, though. It'll be up to you to talk him out of Chopin." The year was 1924. If only I'd been a man about Mayfair at that time instead of a schoolboy about southeast London, I might have supped at the Berkeley, perhaps after seeing that American pair, the Astairs, who were taking the town at the Shaftesbury Theatre and stopped flirting. There I might have danced to the music of the Boston Orchestra, all 5 of them. Howard Jacobs, saxophone, Reginald Purseglove, violin, Joe Brandley, banjo, Alec Ure, drums, and at the piano a slight, white-faced younger with black, bushy eyebrows. The Savoy group men had heard Carroll Gibbons play and had persuaded him to play their kind of music. So the boy from the Boston Conservatory was in the Boston Orchestra. It sounded right. They made only one record, augmented by a trumpet, a trombone, and an alto sax. "Mama's Gone Goodbye," a typical 1925 title. Notice Carroll splitting tenths with the left hand, the very latest thing. Upwards, though, the latest thing later would be to split them top to bottom. the hotter-than-hot Boston Orchestra. Not a sign yet of the Carroll Gibbons style we would come to know. But time, in this context, was in plentiful supply because he liked London and decided to stay. Carroll was born in Clinton, Massachusetts on January the 4th, 1903, and was playing the piano in public at the age of 10. At that time, Europe was the mecca for classical music, as America was the mecca for jazz. It's strange and lucky for us that Carroll should come to London, if not with classical music as his absolute goal, at least with a musically open mind, and should stay to play the kind of music that would normally attract an aspirant in the other direction. Soon he made a neat glissando down to the Strand, where the Boston Orchestra stood in for the famous Savoy Orpheans and Savoy Havana bands. In 1926, yet another group was formed, the Savoy Sylvians. Carroll was at the piano and in charge. In the recording studio, he accompanied Elsie Carlisle and even chimed in vocally, with modesty and a little off mic.
My cutie do at toodle-doo, he's coming through on a big choo-choo. He's been away for months, but I haven't cheated once. Stayed home nights, didn't dance, wasn't taking any chance. Didn't flirt, though it hurt, I just couldn't do my cutie dirt. My days were blue, my nights were black, but I just knew that he'd come back, 'cause I love him and he loves me. And say, tonight I'll disconnect my phone, because we want to be alone. My cutie do at toodle-doo today. My cutie do at toodle-doo, he's coming through on a big choo-choo. He's been away for months, but I haven't cheated once. He's kind of short, about 5'2", got bow legs and cross-eyed too. A guy you wouldn't think much of, but oh my gosh, how he can love. My days were blue, my nights were black, but I just knew that he'd come back, 'cause I love him and he loves me. And say, and when I feel his lips on mine, I won't let go till 9:30. My cutie do at toodle-doo today.
Your cutie do
At toodle-doo
is coming through.
on a big choo-choo.
He's been away for months.
But I haven't cheated once, stayed home nights. I wasn't taking any chance, didn't flirt. I just couldn't do my cutie dirt. My days were blue, but I just knew that he'd come back, 'cause I love him and he loves me. And say, don't think there ain't no Santa Claus,
Why, you know darn well there is.
because my cutie do at toodle-doo today, day, do, do, do.
The most famous of the Savoy bands by the late 20s was the Orpheans. I had, or rather the relations I spent my summer holidays with had, a stack of records labelled De Broy Summers and the Savoy Hotel Orpheans. Well, De Broy, or Bill Summers, I would meet too in the 40s. In 1927, he handed his Savoy baton to Carroll Gibbons. Carroll had met a fellow American named Jimmy Derenforth, who, like Carroll, had decided to make his home in England. They began writing songs together. Later in 27, Carroll took the Orpheans on a 3-month tour of Germany, then came back, not to lead them again at the Savoy, but to become director of light music for HMV. A Romanian ex-minister of agriculture was in London at that time. It sounds unlikely, but it's quite true. He hadn't yet starred for Charles B. Cochran in Wake Up and Dream, nor, of course, the later Bittersweet, but the signs were good. He was handsome, had the currently popular European accent, and a pleasant singing voice. When you're director of light music for a major recording company, why not record one of your own? The year was 1928, the month July. Carroll wrote the music, Jimmy Derenforth the words, and George Metaxa sang. The verse, I think Jerry Kern would have been proud of. Short, but very special.
I recall a summer's day when you and I had strolled away, and suddenly a storm drew nigh. Seeking shelter from the rain, we strolled along a little lane, and saw a lovely sight nearby. Was just a garden in the lane, close to the little leafy lane, a touch of color and the skies of grey. The raindrops kiss the flower beds, the blossoms raise the thirsty heads, a perfumed thank you they seem to say. Surely there was charm beyond compare to view, maybe just that I was there with you. 'Twas just a garden in the rain, but then the sun came out again, and sent us happy on our way. Surely there was charm beyond comparative view. Maybe it was just that I was there with you. 'Twas just a garden in the rain, but then the sun came out again, and sent us happily on our way.
Slight touch of vocal hysteria setting in at the end. Carroll's recordings for HMV with the new Mayfair Orchestra were popular enough, but after little more than a year, he handed over to Ray Noble and took off for Hollywood, and the delights of working for Louis B. Mayer at MGM. Many stood these delights for quite a time. Carroll was back with us in 1931, and reforming the Savoy Hotel Orpheans with Howard Jacobs, who also came from Massachusetts. In June of 1932, Carroll assumed control, and for more than 2 more decades would travel to and from that small turning off the Strand, the only street in London where you must drive on the right. The golden years began, and it seemed impossible they could ever end. There was a depression, they kept telling us. I can only say that I was at drama school in the early 30s. On a scholarship, I couldn't have managed it otherwise, and I wasn't depressed. I don't know why. Quite a few of us lived on tea and a cherry bakewell tart at the ABC, 1 tart apiece, and the conversation was about what we would do when we became stars. There was never a moment's doubt, and never a moan. Jimmy Stewart, who would later change his name to Stuart Granger, did go on a bit about the difficulty of getting a screen test, but the depression, as such, didn't get a look in. Mind you, we didn't have television pumping out misery and disruption to us 15 hours a day. We had the wireless, so much gentler, with late-night dance music from all the best hotels in town. Somebody even had a gramophone. We were in clover. Vicarious clover, perhaps, but clover. The Gibbons piano style, by now, was really with us. Carroll had added a second piano, at which sat a man I was to meet and even write the odd song with, Harry Jacobson by name. The tenths, by now, were being split downwards, firmly and beautifully.
We talk it over, let's talk it over before you tell me you're through. Can't we sit together and figure whether this is the right thing to do? I hate the thoughts of spending nights all alone, missing the thrill of nights that we've known. Can't we talk it over before it's over, before you whisper goodbye forever? Let's talk it over, dear.
Harry Jacobson playing a perfect second piano with Carroll and singing. The records, as mentioned, cost a couple of bob. I think it was a couple of bob. It may have been 2 and a kick in the financial parlance then current. Carroll Gibbons was marvellous to dance to, or cuddle and sway to would be more accurate, I suppose. I, for one, lived in a wooden extension to a house that measured 9 by 5. The walls bent if you leant against them. Of course, you didn't do that if you were dancing. He also provided background music when you were studying, for instance, the last scene of Othello. I can't think what I was doing studying the last scene of Othello. The casting was baroque, to say the least. I was as thin as a rake and only 5 feet 9. 5 and 9 like the room. We made up with sticks, numbered 5 and 9, come to think of it, a 5 and 9 world. As I worked my way through it is the cause, my soul, which is the lead-up to the bit where he strangles Desdemona, I had a borrowed disc record on this borrowed portable. Mr. Gibbons giving his version of I Guess I'll Have to Change My Plan. A pity Othello couldn't respond. Arthur Schwartz wrote it, Carroll played it. I guess I'll have to change my plan. When I left drama school and went on the stage, a mysterious change came over my life. For some reason, which to this day escapes me, wealthy mothers began to look upon me as Deb fodder. I was doing well. I even had my picture in the papers, but I had nothing in the bank. A good financial catch I wasn't. Hungry I was, so I accepted every invitation that came my way. I owned evening dress. If you were an actor, you had to. It was obligatory. Therefore, I was to be seen not infrequently dancing, say, to Roy Fox's band at Moiseiwitsch, where Al Bowley sang the vocals, at the Café de Paris, where Al sang the vocals too, as I recall. He did float around a bit. Blue Stone's band was at the Café for a spell. He even sang them with Carroll.
Just picture a penthouse way up in the sky, with hinges on chimneys for stars to go by, a sweet slice of heaven for just you and I. When we're alone, from all of society we'll stay aloof, and live in propriety there on the roof. Two heavenly hermits we will be in truth. When we're alone, we'll use life's mad pattern as we view old Manhattan. Then we can thank our lucky star that we're living as we are. In our little penthouse we'll always contrive to keep love and romance forever alive, in view of the Hudson just over the drive. When we're alone.
In the 30s, commercial radio had to reach this country from Europe. It's consistent with the British foible that we might listen to music that advertised jam, provided we twiddled the knob on the wireless half an inch to the right. The lunacy shone to the full when you realised the broadcasts were recorded freely in London and flown to Europe to be sent back to us over what we then called the ether. You couldn't imagine anything more British if you tried hard. Carroll fulfilled these stints with a small group he called the Boyfriends. Innocence continued to hold sway. If it hadn't, you can bet the British powers that were would have disallowed the title. On the air, Carroll's wireless signature, he wrote the melody, announced that Carroll was on the commercial air too. Singing the vocals was a rather special lady named Anne Lenner. She had two sisters, Shirley Lenner and Judy Shirley. An interesting choice by Carroll, since Anne Lenner avoided the prevalent temptation to sing in pseudo-American. It was a very English voice, and most attractive, therefore. Moreover, it fitted the sound Carroll made to perfection. His was far from being an American sound. The American polish it had, yes.
The right to bring you your coffee in the morning and kisses in the night. It makes no difference where we decide to live, as long as I'm the one, dear, who's always going to give you your coffee in the morning and kisses in the night. The wedding bells sound sad and dirgy. I'm waiting for those bells to chime, 'cause with the benefit of clergy, we'll be together all the time. There are a few things you may dislike in me, but you can count on two things that I will guarantee, dear. Your coffee in the morning and kisses in the night.
Accompaniment was something Carroll enjoyed and managed uncommonly well. He liked contributing from the orchestra bit of a theatre. In February of 1937, one of the best musicals I ever saw opened at the Palace Theatre, London. On Your Toes was a couple of decades ahead of its time and died a death, much lamented by those who understood it. So lamented, in fact, that an effort was made to bring it to life by presenting it to the Coliseum, where it died again. The score was by Rodgers and Hart. Jack Whiting sang one of their best songs to the superb accompaniment of Carroll and the Savoy Hotel Orpheans.
I'd like to get away, honey, somewhere alone with you. It could be oh so gay, honey, you need a laugh or two.
A certain place I know, sweetheart, where funny people can have fun. That's where we two will go, darling, before you can count up 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a small hotel with a wishing well. I wish that we were there together. There's no bridal suite, 1 room bright and neat, complete for us to share together. Looking through the window you can see a distant steeple, not a sign of people who wants people. When the steeple bell says good night, sleep well, we'll thank that small hotel together. Pretty window curtains made of chintz in our make-believe land. On the wall are several cheerful prints of Washington and Cleveland. Go down into the parlor and feast your eyes on the moose head on the wall. Perhaps you'd like to play the organ. They tune it every other fall. The garden will be like Adam and Eve land. No, they never did go in for carriage trade. They get what is known as marriage trade. Oh, when the steeple bell says good night, sleep well, you very small hotel. We'll peep into our little shell, and we will thank that small hotel together.
We in Britain continued to dance and sing into the late 30s, unaware, or determined to be unaware, of the marching noises made across the water by the Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, which Winston Churchill was soon to refer to scathingly as the Nazis. In 1939, shortly before the sluice gates opened, Carroll went to America for a holiday. He was caught there when war broke out. I had quite a few American friends who were caught on this side of the Atlantic, and I recall the anxious waiting to go back. That an American should be anxious to leave America and travel west to east confounded the United States authorities. It took Carroll 6 months to convince them he'd rather be here than there. In January of 40, he was welcomed back at the Savoy with open arms and more than one open bottle. Charles B. Cochran produced a revue called Lights Up at the Savoy Theatre, adjacent to the hotel. Cocky was host on a wireless program too, and with typical flair, invited both Benno Moiseiwitsch and Carroll Gibbons to be his guests.
Hello. Who's my competitor? It sounds rather good.
Well, that's Carroll Gibbons. You must meet him. Carroll.
Yes, CBC.
This is Mr. Moiseiwitsch, Mr. Carroll Gibbons of the Savoy.
Well, good evening, Mr. Moiseiwitsch. I scarcely dare to look you in the face.
Oh, but why?
Well, because you caught me trying to swing Rachmaninoff's Prelude.
Oh, that was very nice. But still, I often wondered why you fellows do not stick to the music which is so well provided for you, instead of making incursions into the classics.
Well, I suppose it's because swing music is all the craze at the moment, and if we actually have to go for a great melody, well, we go to the classics.
That's strange. Still, go on, do let me hear some more. envy your adroitness and sense of adaptation.
Well, thanks a lot. I'm very glad.
I always enjoy listening to swing music, as long as it's done as discreetly and cleverly as you're doing it.
Then I think, Benno, I may call you Benno, mayn't I? All my friends do.
Certainly, Charlie.
Well, you should atone for the corruption of this little masterpiece, and perhaps you'd be kind enough to play this prelude as the composer intended it to be played.
Very well, C.B. But with Carroll Gibbons' permission, I would rather play it in the original key of C-sharp minor, which is much easier for me.
Well, Mr. Carroll Gibbons, will you kindly give up the seat to Moiseiwitsch?
It's a pleasure. I'm always ready to give my place to a better man.
There was no better man than Carroll to fill the place he'd chosen for himself. The Savoy restaurant continued to be an oasis of reassurance in the wartime desert. It was an American, too, who wrote the melody of one of the most British of songs. Manning Sherwin, his name was. In the atmosphere of bewilderment that obtained in mid-1940, he got together with Erich Maschwitz and penned a piece of musical romance that was so out of keeping with gas masks, anti-aircraft emplacements, and the uniforms that were everywhere to be seen in London, that it seemed, as it were, to put us in keeping again with sanity. It was an incongruously romantic lyric for a public that preferred its lunacy linked with lovers. To my mind, it inspired more confidence than a dozen Tipperaries. Carroll played it and played it. It was always on request.
Abroad in the air, there were angels flying in emerald bricks, and a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. I may be right, I may be wrong, but I'm perfectly willing to swear that when you turned and smiled at me, a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. The moon that lingered over London town, poor puzzled moon, he wore a frown. How could he know we two were so in love? The whole darn world seemed upside down. The streets of town were paved with stars. It was such a romantic affair. And as we kissed and said goodnight, a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square.
When the ironmongery began to fall, and even nightingales were, for the time being anyway, silenced, the Orpheans were not too put out. Put off the rostrum, yes. Carroll told me of a near miss in the Strand that tossed the odd musician about and tumbled him from the stool of his white piano. It happened that Noel Coward was in the restaurant. Now, Coward didn't play the piano well, but he enjoyed doing it. Before Carroll could recover his composure at his stool, Noel was on it, playing and singing. His opening line was, "And a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square." The diners gave him a sitting ovation for that, and Carroll flopped into a nearby chair and joined in the applause. Noel continued playing and leading a sing-song. The anti-aircraft guns were going full blast in Hyde Park and could be heard for miles. What with the shells going up and the bombs coming down, it was an interesting concert. Carroll and I met in the spring of 1943. I'm going to get lit up had found a home at last in the Sid Field show Strike a New Note at the Prince of Wales Theatre. Peter Maurice published it, and one day I called in at Tin Pan Alley. The songwriting business was new to me, and I was meeting some marvellous people. Jimmy Phillips was in the office with Joe Branley. They said they wanted me to meet the man who would be the first to record my song. Now, this statement in itself was enough to cause a temporary paralysis, but when Carroll Gibbons walked in and said, "Hello," my cup ranneth all over Jimmy Phillips' floor. It was a strange coincidence that Du Bois Summers, Carroll's predecessor as conductor of the Orpheans, had made the theatre arrangement and was conducting the pit orchestra at the Prince of Wales. When Carroll's recording came out, I bought 3 copies, stacked them on my machine, and played them again and again. I couldn't believe my luck.
Get lit up when the lights go up in London. I'm gonna get lit up as I've never been before. You will find me on the tiles, you will find me wreathed in smiles. I'm gonna get so lit up I'll be visible for miles. The city will sit up when the lights go up in London. We'll all be lit up as the Strand was, only more, much more. And before the party's played out, they will fetch the fire brigade out to the littest, uppest scene you ever saw.
I was lucky, too, in that the song caught on. Apart from anything else, it enabled me to pay more frequent visits to the Savoy restaurant, no longer as Deb fodder, but under my own steam. I used to like using the river entrance. For one thing, it was the entrance Winston Churchill always used, though of course he didn't come for dancing. As you went up the long staircase and made your winding way to the restaurant, you received, I did anyway, an olfactory experience, if you like, a smell. A very special smell. Was it ozone? A palmy smell. Well, they were palmy days, so why not? It was exhilarating, I remember it vividly. On we go, the distant music becoming gradually louder as we make our way. We drop our coats, and here we are in the restaurant. I say, there's Anne Lenner. I think she may be going to sing. Good evening, Santarelli. Oh, Soupy, you've given us a table in the corner, right by Carroll. I think we'll take a turn around the floor before we order, if you'd care to. Would you?
You see, I'm nobody's baby. I wonder why each night and day I pray the Lord up above, please send me down somebody to love. But nobody wants me. I'm blue somehow when someone hears my plea. Take a chance with me because I'm nobody's baby now.
Carroll was a hard worker. He had to be to achieve such apparent ease at the keyboard, and for his band to maintain such polish. Once weekly they rehearsed at the Savoy, for the Savoy. There were recordings, radio rehearsals and appearances. Throughout wartime there were the every Sunday trips, here, there and everywhere to entertain the forces. Moreover, Carroll was a great stayer-up. Often he played cards until the large hours. Then he was in his office by 11 a.m., choosing music, leafing through orchestrations. I met this unsparing professionalism at first hand in the early spring of 1945. Carroll joined Leslie Henson in presenting a show at the Winter Garden Theatre. Leslie Henson's Gaieties was the title. They asked me if I had any songs they could include. I always had songs, and 3 of them went into the Gaieties. Carroll was to conduct the orchestra in the pit. I remember his strict injunction to his musicians at the first band call. "No deputies," he said. "I don't want any of you putting in deputies. When I look around me at the overture every night, I want to see the same faces. Okay?" I never did understand, I must say, a musician being prepared to let another step into his place. It seemed to me that it was a belittlement of his own contribution to the orchestra, that he should feel anyone else would manage as well. There were no deputies. The dress rehearsal for the Gaieties went on almost ad nauseam. Poor Leslie Henson, who was directing too, had polished everyone but himself. He'd sacrificed his own sketches to the extra rehearsal of other actors. Carroll looked white and really ill as the time drew near for opening. The rehearsal finished, I think, half an hour before the audience arrived. I had invited Robert and Iris Nesbitt to be my guests for the evening. We moved into our seats and sat waiting for the overture. I was apprehensive. I knew what a kerfuffle must be going on backstage and in the band room. The musicians trooped into their places. Suddenly, a pale but beautifully spruce Carroll Gibbons, white-tied and tailed, stepped up onto the pit podium. Half an hour earlier, I'd seen him in his shirt sleeves and braces, the honest sweat pouring. A roar of applause, of course. He acknowledged it with his head, his back to us, and he raised his arms to begin the music. From the first beat it was superb, not the merest sign of weariness from all the preparation. I did wonder, though, whether Carroll would stay up all night again tonight. I continued to collect his records. I liked one song he wrote with Jimmy Derenforth.
Grocers grow to hate the sight of greens. Icemen hate ice. Show me the milkman who thinks that milk is nice. Too much sentimentalizing means to lose its spice. So although it may not be the fashion, let's ration our passion and let's be sensible. Let's go slow. Love's a flower that's got to grow. Let's be sensible. Nurse it along with care. Gently let it grow in its own sweet way. Don't keep digging it up each day. Let's be sensible. Nurse it along with care. To possess real happiness, you'll find that you must take some things on trust. Leave your past undiscussed. It's indispensable that we know love's a flower that's got to grow. Let's be sensible, nurse it along with care. just. Take some things on trust. Leave your past undiscussed. It's indispensable that we know love's a flower that's got to grow. Let's be sensible, nurse it along with care. You simply must take care of love.
In the late 40s, I lived in George Street, West 1, in a block of flats called Cumberland Mansions. I discovered that Carroll was living opposite, in the rather grander Bryanston Court. Carroll came inevitably to call and played my piano quite a lot. Hutch had played on it too. It was becoming expensive to speak to that piano. I asked him about the trick of playing single notes in the bass. Simple, he said, and showed me. For him it was. I tried, and it wasn't simple enough for me. But how effective when he did it. One of my favourite records of his begins like this. Cole Porter's Easy to Love. Carroll certainly was that. Looking back, I wonder how, in the murky professional swim, he managed to retain such a clean-cut charm. And that word again, innocence. He was a great party man. I speak not politically, but socially. One of his party tricks, he used it in his broadcast programs, was to make up a tune on the spot. He'd ask the assembly to call out 3 notes. A, F sharp, D, they might say. Carroll would play A, F sharp, D a couple of times, and then would go into instant composition. Every year we invited him to be our guest at the Green Room Club dinner. He looked like a happy schoolboy when we asked him to play late in the evening. Notes would be called out. He began his instant composition, and he lured me into trying instant lyric writing. Some peculiar marriages of words and music were made. Time ran out far too soon for Carroll. The attachment to work and play, the late nights and all that goes with them, he determined not to miss a moment in enjoyable company, or a moment being enjoyable company. He wrote a song with Douglas Ferber for Leslie Henson's Gaieties. The words were Dougie's, but Carroll, I'm quite sure, fell in with the idea. It was swell while it lasted, but it couldn't last for too long. He died of a heart attack in London on May the 10th, 1954. He was 51 years old. I like to remember, finally, another party trick, a song Carroll loved to confuse us with. He put it on record one day.
Well, goodbye now, I'll be seeing you. Well, goodbye now, glad to have met up with you. Yeah, I'll meet you down at Brighton next Wednesday night. We'll go into one of them prize waltzes, and maybe if we're good enough, the guy that owns the hall will give us one of those prize dozes. Well, goodbye now, I'll be seeing you. Well, goodbye now, glad to have met up with you. No, I'm afraid you can't take me home. You see, my father's a night watchman. He gets in about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. He hates to see young men strewn all over the veranda. No, well, goodbye now. I'll be seeing you. And we'll both have a grand old time.
He made it in one take. He didn't need to do it again. I wish he could, though. All of it. Good night. To you.
I Call It Style was devised, written and presented by Hubert Gregg, and the production was by Phyllis Robinson. Let me just remind you that next Tuesday at 7:30, Hubert Gregg will turn his personal spotlight on Duke Ellington. Well, now, just before Folk on 2, an urgent message from our travel unit for drivers in West Yorkshire. Apparently torrential rain has fallen in the last hour there, and as a result, the A652 is impassable at Batley on the Bradford to Dewsbury Road, and the A637 between Barnsley and Huddersfield near Flockton. That's also impassable. Seriously affected too are the A63 near its junction with the A1 at Ledsham, the A64 between Leeds and York, the A58 between Leeds and Wetherby, and the A641 at Brighouse, and the A650 on the Wakefield bypass. So, obviously, if you can, do delay your journey until the roads are clear, and in any case, keep clear of these badly affected roads. This is Radio 2, the time now just after 8:30.